One. Hello everyone, welcome to another Metanet meeting. Normally I number these, but I actually lost the numbers, so I'm not numbering this one. This one will be sent out to members only. Well, as I mentioned just a bit earlier, it might eventually reach a public space. We are primarily focusing on a bit of Q&A and we will be talking about people's projects a bit later. No, we won't be joined by Craig. He's got this study for exams. Right, yeah, so questions about the legal stuff going on in matter. Oh, I need to say as well, at first, just so it's clear for everyone, as you all know, but for anyone else watching, I am not part of Craig's legal team, or nor do I have any insider information, and nor do I, take any part in any decision making or choices or anything therein. So, from how I'm talking is a third person perspective. Yeah, I mean, I might have a bit of slight knowledge here and there, but I don't have any say in what's actually happening and such. So the issues that keeps getting raised and that I've been asked about repeatedly is about the current court cases which is going on. Right, to clarify first of all what is going on, Craig had 110,000 Bitcoins stolen from his computer, and the file though is encrypted and the coins haven't been able to be moved, so the coins are still sitting there. And what is happening with the case is that he wants them returned, as anyone who gets things stolen would like their stolen property returned. And so the case is proving to be a good example of showing that this can happen. And as Satoshi, he did talk about this years ago, saying how, gold could be turned to lead and then turned back into gold when it was returned. So this is the slight background. Coins got stolen, he would like them returned. And this is being pursued on the BTC, BCH, and BSV chains. It is possible on all three chains. It is actually possible completely on all blockchains. So questions that people have had in the Slack, which I'll try and answer here, is the process of returning coins would be applying to a court and getting a court order. You'd have to report the coins stolen to your local police, and then you'd have to get a court order to say, yes, those coins were stolen. You'd have to prove that you had ownership of the coins, so receipts, sales, however you can prove it, sending the money to an exchange and that the account was under your name or whatever else. There's various ways you can prove ownership of said coins, and then you can state that they were stolen. Police report and such is needed as well for that. After reporting that and going through the court process, and then the court will sign a court order and say, yes, these coins should be returned. At the moment, the narrative, call it a false narrative or mistaken narrative, that is pushed is that the ledger is immutable and things can't be returned. The ledger is immutable, things can be returned. So it's a ledger, as you all know, and as with like the ledger bookkeeping, what you do with like a double entry bookkeeping, when you make an amendment, the keyword is amendment here, you make an amendment and then the ledger is changed to reflect the new accounts. You keep a record of the older accounts. So the same thing happens with Bitcoin. You make an amendment, the code is used to make an amendment, the record of where the coins were is kept, and then it's changed to the coins are now here. So there's no, one of the questions people came up with was, isn't this creating new coins? And it's like, no, it's not creating new coins, it's moving the coins. With like double entry bookkeeping, if you have to make an amendment and move the numbers around, you would basically cross it out from one area, move it over here, and then the end amount would still equal up to the right amount. This is a similar thing with Bitcoin. You would cross out the entry where the stolen coins are, and you'd move it over here. So the total amounts would still remain the same at the bottom. The process, another question which was brought up earlier, was wouldn't this make it really easy for people just to basically, we're trying to compare it to reverse banking, sorry, chargebacks, which kind of reverse banking. So chargebacks, the difference here, right? So someone trying to do a chargeback, which is, it needs a better word, but maybe it might have its own word one day. Someone trying to do this method on Bitcoin will have, as just mentioned, will have to go through the judicial process, report it, go through the courts and such. Someone doing a chargeback with the traditional banking system just has to go to the initial bank and say, you know, I didn't buy that item, I want to do a chargeback. You are charged for doing a chargeback. Sometimes apparently the cost of the chargeback is passed on to businesses, even though businesses actually lose out anyway, because obviously they've just had the money taken from them. The cost, I believe there are costs, well, obviously there are definitely costs in doing the process in Bitcoin, because you've got to pay court costs and everything to get it all through. And I'm unsure of what the other costs are, but I do believe there are some other costs involved if you're processing it through Bitcoin, as in like a kind of reward fee to people like developers who comply. But I am unsure of that, so don't quote me on that part. But yes, there are costs involved on the court side of things. With the traditional banking system, it is about the onus of responsibility. A bank doesn't have to go through the process of going to the police and going to the courts and everything. They can just go, yeah, okay, here you go, boom, hit the reverse charge thing and take the money from wherever it was. They don't need a court process, they don't need the court order, and they don't even need the agreement of the other people of the other side. They can just, you know, take it. They don't have to say to the business, was this item stolen, blah, blah, blah. Did you actually sell them the item or whatever? I shared something in Slack the other day about chargeback fraud and such, because there's a lot of fraud in chargeback. This is where one of the discussions was centering around. And the concern was that there'll be crime in, that there would be crime in Bitcoin because people will be doing these chargeback type processes. But you see, in Bitcoin, when you've got to go to the police and got to go through the court process, you've got to prove that the item, that your item, your Bitcoin was stolen, and that you never received the goods and whatnot. If you're doing it to a merchant and they can say, look, we actually sold them the goods, and they have a receipt for it, and then you initiating the whole court process and everything are going to be a bit shafted, and you'll be on the wrong side of the law. You should always get receipts and such for doing business. With the traditional chargeback, with traditional banks doing chargebacks, the onus of responsibility is on that initial bank or doing the process, starting the process, initiating it and completing it. Whereas the with Bitcoin, the process is a lot more onerous. Is that the right word? It's trickier, and it requires more evidence of like something bad has occurred. Any questions, by the way, so far during this while I'm rambling along? Type in the chat. All right. No. One of the things I want to bring up as well. Oh, okay. Yes, there is a statute of limitations to theft. It has to be reported within a certain time frame. I don't know what that is offhand. I think it's several years, but you'll have to look that one up. So yeah, there's statute of limitations. Yeah, it is a certain time frame. There is no cost limitation. Like you could do it for £10, but there is a cost involved in the process, as I've mentioned. So it's uneconomical to try and do it for £10 items. You're likely only going to do this for like high value items. One of the things which might be interesting is that it doesn't exist yet, but I quite strongly can envision an automated legal process for low value items. So a mostly automated process, because there would still be probably a human involvement at some point, or a consumer error report method. Basically, when you go to court, magistrates courts, and do the low level crimes, there can be an automated process to process small value stolen goods and such, and a way of trying to claim back the funds. But this process would probably involve something like scanning a receipt showing that the item was sold or not sold. Or maybe like the ones who sold the item would have to be the ones scanning receipt to prove, to show proof of sale and whatnot, and that the person was there. There are methods around it, but I do believe those systems would still need human interaction as well. And they would still cost a bit of money to process. So you're not going to be seeing it for really low value stuff. More questions, anyone? What is likely going to happen with the BTC law? This is just my own prediction stuff, and it is probable that the BTC devs will play the silly buggers and will say it's not possible and ignore Craig and so on. And it's quite probable that the BCH devs will also do the same. Whereas the BSV devs will turn around and say, okay, we'll just deploy the code, and there you go. It's not a protocol change. It was always intended that people will be able to freeze items and then unfreeze items. Because the process, right, interesting thing, the process can be done for Bitcoin directly, but you can also do a very similar process for, say, if you've got oil on the market and the oil has been marked with EDI process, and you've got like 1,000 barrels of oil or something, and then that gets stolen. And then you'd be able to say, right, that's been stolen, and all of those barrels of oil would be marked as stolen. And so that anyone trying to sell those oil onwards legally would run into big troubles and wouldn't be able to. And also it might be flagged up quickly if someone did sell a stolen barrel of oil. You know, say I brought a stolen barrel of oil, and then the system might go, well, the stolen oil has just been flagged and brought up and moved. And also it might be a case of people tracking it if it's marked under a token of some format. We'll see that it's moved. Just admitting someone else. So this application of law of freezing and unfreezing is applicable to more than just Bitcoin. It's applicable to stolen goods. You might have jewelry. You might have jewelry that you brought someone, and they get robbed, and the necklace, you can report it as stolen, and the whatever is representing that necklace will tag it as stolen. And if it turns up, and then you'll be notified, and you might even be notified where it's turned up, that is. Business opportunities there, by the way, because you can't expect the judiciary systems around the world to even know this is possible, for starters. Secondly, to even come up with the systems themselves. They tend to outsource to private business and companies. But yeah, tagging valuables, trade goods, commodities, all these things, phones, and like I said, freezing and unfreezing them is possible. I mean, like the freezing process could be a case of literally with the Bitcoin, a freezing process could be a case of blocking them from being moved. But say like with jewelry being tagged, it might just be a case of marking it as stolen so that it can't be sold further on, and people have to use like black markets and whatnot. Makes it a lot harder for them. Questions? Any more questions?
So I guess with the miners, they would be the ones to, of course, include these correction entries to the ledger in subsequent blocks. It wouldn't be going back and changing the previous transactions and having to redo all of the proof of work.
Yeah.
The miners being the ones to include these correction entries into the block, would they not have some discretion? Of course, if there's a court order, they would be compelled to include the correction entries, and other miners would be compelled to accept them if they were valid court orders. But in other cases where there is no valid court order, as is the case with the discretion of the initiating bank in a chargeback scenario, would not the miners be able to use their discretion to include non-court ordered corrections to the ledger to kind of get a more efficient process where you wouldn't necessarily need to go through the courts? And in those cases, would not the other miners have a choice as to whether they see these kind of not extrajudicial, but sort of the corrections entered at the discretion of miners? They may be able to then see them as being valid or invalid, and then accepting or rejecting the blocks, or how do you see that kind of working?
If it can be proved beyond a doubt that a crime has occurred, then yes, I can see that occurring for small amounts. But I can't see it happening for large amounts for miners, because it puts them at huge risk that, oops, I moved someone's money and it wasn't stolen. But if there was a system, there'd have to be a really strong system in play where they knew beyond a doubt that they weren't messing things up. Because otherwise, say if I asked miners to move your money and you legitimately had your money, and then you would sue the crap out of the miners and me. But
it
yes,
seems like
go on. Sorry.
It seems like the certain industries, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, I believe, is essentially self-regulating in that they have their own private set of rules and such, and of course there is oversight from regulators, the SEC and whatnot. But I just draw a parallel here, because it seems as though miners may choose to form an industry sort of framework that wasn't necessarily mandated by law, but which is simply just a private coalition of businesses, which then come together to establish a kind of policies for those sorts of things, and implement them in the same way, I guess, as the stock exchanges have done, just so that there's clear rules, and so that everybody involved has those protections.
I can envision as you said, a coalition of businesses creating a settlement process, an out-of-court settlement process, because courts love settlement before they have to go through the whole process. If people can just, easily prove that X, Y, Z happened and not have to drag it out for the courts, they love that.
Much lower cost in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there was a coalition of businesses who had strong connections to the courts and such, and actually had the right to process all of this, I imagine that they would be some strong oversight, very strong oversights, and then they might have a method to, yes, forward such forms, have a complaint procedures themselves, so users could go to their website and their process and say, look, I suffered this theft and that, and they say, okay, you proven 100% proof of ownership and evidence, and this is an easy very easy court case thing, and we just forward this because, as you say, like in some cases, it's obvious theft, and going through the whole court process, they might have to wait like weeks to actually get a court date. Especially, well, in this COVID bloody times, they'll have to wait months, but in normal times, they might have to wait weeks. But going through a process like you've just described, it could be shortened considerably, yeah. There's the Bitcoin Association. I'm not speaking for them at all, and I'm not putting words in anything's mouth, but I can imagine a coalition of businesses under the Bitcoin Association, or separate too, but similar in a way, being able to process things like this.
I suspect perhaps miners would be a big part of that if they decided that it was cheaper to come together and do that than to respond to all the court orders that they would otherwise need to respond to.
Yeah, there's I mentioned it in Slack, and Craig's mentioned it as well. I mentioned it a while ago. There's with crime, there's a analysis which is a risk reward analysis. Basically, whereas is it worth a criminal to commit a crime and get the reward back? In some cases, they happily commit the crime, even if the risk involves going to prison, because the reward after coming out of prison is still worth it for them. Like Mark Capels, for example, you know, he's walked off with a nice amount. But this process will mean that people like him can't win. There'd be absolutely no point in even committing crimes in the first place if people can actually get their funds, all their funds, directly back as well. I think they're giving back something like 10%. Empty boxes is something
they're trying, but
yeah, it's been going on for years. It's ridiculous what's going on there. So meanwhile, Carpels is laughing like. So yeah, it would be, so the risk reward basically balance shifts massively in favor of justice and not doing with crimes in the first place, because a lot of criminals are actually quite intelligent, hence
they're rational
able to
actors.
get away. Yeah, absolutely. If a lot of them actually went, you know what, it's more profitable for me to play by the honest rules, and then there's going to be a lot more honest workers and a lot more growth in the general system.
To roughly quote the white paper, he may find it more profitable to abide by the rules than to undermine the validity of his own wealth, or something to that effect. Of course, that's in reference to minors, but criminals may well be subjected to the same set of choices.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, there's definitely a huge psychological element, and one thing touched upon as well is that it changes society as a whole. When crime doesn't pay, because you know, the saying is that crime doesn't pay, but it does actually pay. If you get away with it does pay a lot. But and that's not promoting crime at all. That's just saying the hard fact. Years ago, like we're talking centuries ago, medieval crime and whatnot, there's such a low percentage of criminals that were caught. And that percentage has slowly risen and risen and risen. But even today, comparatively, there is a low percentage of criminals that are caught. And the top criminals, who people don't even hear about, you know, they have shit tons, excuse my language, they have a ton of money stashed away. And Breaking Bad was a good example of, you know, they have so much money they just bury it in the ground. I doubt they actually bury it in the ground, but some of you have probably seen the videos of how there are certain banks in certain countries where the accountants there are basically recruited. They go down to the car park and they're told, right, there's these coaches full of money, literally full of stacks of money, go and sort that out, and that all needs to be moved into accounts. And it's basically a ton of laundered money. And Yeah, one of the things about it all is taxable money as well. If there's tax avoidance and tax evasion is illegal, but tax avoidance is workable. But even so, if you moved all the tax evasion money out of tax evasion, but a lot of countries will still have a lot of money, a lot more money to spend on their citizens and spend on improvement and spend on, the general civil society. So there's a lot of money lost to countries because of that. So anyway, unless anyone has any more questions, we can come back to questions, but I want to move over to Everett's project and give him the floor.
Yes, so I've been working on for about the past year or so now, some technologies built on top of Bitcoin SV, primarily centered around allowing users to interact with applications in a better way. Right now, each application has to focus on a lot of the things that are unique to Bitcoin, but not unique to their specific application that they're trying to build. So the tools that I've been working on creating will hopefully enable those people to focus more on what they're trying to do and less on, for example, managing private keys for their users and such things like that. It's similar to something like Money Button in some ways, but it's much more extensible. For those familiar with Money Button, there's a thing called the crypto operations, where you can kind of encrypt things from or for users, and then that content is encrypted with a key that only the user has. I've taken that principle and extended it much further to an entire set of hierarchical keys, and I've created a permissioning system so that applications can leverage not only for encryption and decryption, but signing using HMAC and all these other things with cryptography. So some technical stuff there, but it gives application developers a lot of control to create applications and protocols built on top of Bitcoin SV that will that leverage different ways of encrypting things and things like that. So just kind of everything's it's very early at this stage. There's definitely lots of bugs and whatnot, but also built a Paymail implementation that preserves on-chain privacy. It actually implements the theoretical concept of Benford's law that was written about by someone at nChain a couple of years back. I think there's a blog post called Benford's Wallet. So it implements that. No address reuse. It uses R puzzles. So there's some cool things there. Completely compatible with the Metanet philosophy of having these transactions that are signed by specific keys. So you can actually use an R puzzle to just start. Like normally with this Metanet graph, you would need to like fund the address with a certain amount of money before you create a transaction signed or that leverages the key in that address or something. But I've managed to get our puzzles working there, so helps a lot with interacting with the Metanet. Makes it very easy. Users don't have more than one account across all of their apps because they're signed into this account on my app, and that is it's actually like a desktop application on the computer, and building a mobile one as well. But once they're signed in, this app will manage the permissioning that other apps can leverage to access their keys, and they don't need to have more than one username, password, recovery key, any of that sort of thing. So hopefully it'll make it a lot easier for a lot of the developers in this space to accelerate their projects and kind of build things in a better and more secure way is kind of what I'm going for.
Questions for Everett? Anyone? Can you share the link in
I'll post it in the Zoom chat. Yes.
And also, if anyone else wants to talk about something they're working on at the moment, feel free to let me know. There you go. There's the link in chat. Make sure you save it, because I won't relink it in Slack. What I will do is that when I share this video, I will, well, I'll say it now because people watching will hear this. If you're after the link, talk to Everett, and he will talk back to you.
Yeah, just send me a direct message or something. I'm trying to, I mean, I want to do this in a very soft launch way right now, just because if I go and shout this from the tops of every mountain and things like that, I'm going to get a lot of people, and they're going to probably all find the same bugs and give me the same feedback, and so I'm trying to get a trickle of feedback in so that I can fix things as they arise, and as things get better and more stable, and I write more tests for the code, and I get things kind of in good working order, I can begin to open it up to wider and wider audiences.
So, yeah, I like the sound of what you're making, to be honest. Sounds really good. So I'm going to talk quickly about protocols, because Everett's kind of touching along the lines there. There are many other protocols yet to be created in Bitcoin land. Layers, as Craig's mentioned. There's identity solutions to be made. There's no single perfect identity solution. It depends on who your users are. Some will be better than others. An identity solution doesn't have to do everything. I can do everything, and that might be preferred by some users. But yeah, there's identity solutions there. I'm looking forward to see some kind of library protocol, because an on-chain library, if you imagine how the Metanet protocol is so that people can reference things and basically say, yeah, okay, this is on the Metanet, and they can find things easier. There is room for a library protocol where books and sources of information, categories, and all of that is accessible to people on a global scale, and also stored in certain ways, because obviously you don't want it just all openly free. It needs to be monetized in some way. But even if what a library protocol should do should allow different businesses to be publishers of books, and yet to tag their books in a certain way where people using Bitcoin can find the book they want, or the category they want, or the author they want, and then be able to either read that book or listen to that book, because we, as you know, we can do audio on chain and whatnot. And the methodology of how people get paid is really down to the business. I wouldn't say that would be part of a protocol. It would be down to business sharing models, whether they're sharing directly with the author, how much goes to the publisher, and they pay the author afterwards. That's not something a library protocol should do. There are other protocols like health research and stuff, but we'll get into that. I do also see that there needs to be more higher programming languages, compilers like Script. Script's brilliant, but there is space for more. Script's kind of leaping bounds ahead of every other compiler at the moment. I have seen some other compilers around, and I don't know them exceedingly well, so I can't actually rightly say Script is leaping bounds ahead of the others, because some of them might be doing really well and I just don't know. So if anyone does know of any decent compilers, do let others know. Questions again, or topics to bring up?
It seems as though Craig is, Craig, obviously I've watched his videos with Ryan Charles. this is with reference to the library stuff you were referring to. His kind of objection to the current way of doing libraries and such is that he doesn't want his books changing. So he'll just buy a whole bunch of paper books, and that way nobody can go and update his books, so he can refer to them. With a library protocol, if you put the hash of a book on chain, then an updated revision could be made, but somebody could make reference to the original, and there would be record of the original and then what changed. So there's no kind of revisionism that's possible. I think that's an important element of any library protocol that's going to be created.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. And personally, because I like my paperback books, but definitely. There's a thing about the smell of a book. You can't beat that. Definitely. Yeah. So that's another good point on the library thing, being able to revise books, make amendments, but also reference what was there before, so that history can't be rewritten, as is very often done. Also, yeah, an on-chain dictionary would be nice. I know there was some work towards an on-chain dictionary, the Slick Scenario or something. What's that tweet? I'm just saying. A tweet by James Belding. I have a question for you, Everett. Is a K chain just a key chain?
Is a K chain just a key chain? Yes and no. It's used in a different way. We have hierarchical keys that derive from the same root in BIP32. Generally, or you can do it outside of BIP32. But that's a whole other thing. You can use the private keys under certain derivation paths as K, or you can use them as your normal ECDSA signing key. Either way, it's just a question of how you want to use them and represent them. I suppose you could also use the chain code as K, which is an interesting concept because it's unique to the node in the BIP32 key space, but there's some drawbacks there for other reasons, and so yes and no, I guess would be. It depends on the it depends on how you want to use them. I mean, it's just a 256-bit number, and you can use whatever you want as that number, but it's just a convenient way. I mean, BIP32 is just a convenient way of deriving those things from a single root, I would say.
Another question. I have a K in the signature, question mark. I'm over to you. Is that a question or is it a statement?
You have
a super chat?
It's a K. I'm just reading through the chat. 1 second. So you can have a K inside of a signature. You have, well, no, sorry. You have R and S in a signature, right? In EC DSA, and you point. You go. What is it? K by G is your. I'm not exceedingly familiar with the details, but you don't actually put the K value in the signature. You multiply it by, I believe, the generator point of the elliptic curve, and then you can use that in an R puzzle. And you can also you can also multiply it by other things and get really interesting. But I don't know. That's a bit more complex, and there's some things there, but. But you wouldn't put K directly in the signature. You would prove knowledge of K using the signature, if that makes sense.
There's another question which I don't know the answer to. Stash token, using Satoshis to represent balance, is it really a fatal design choice? I don't know enough about the Stash token to say. Anyone?
My answer would be, I guess I would say, Well, okay. I was actually curious. I was actually debating on bringing up this person when you were talking about compilers, because he doesn't use script. He uses like normal script. But I was going to jokingly say, well, can a person be a compiler? Because if so, he would be a really great one. He's very good at low level, like actually stringing together the opcodes and doing things like that. And so is it a fatal design choice? I think definitely not. Ascribing Satoshis to external meetings and then using script to lock in the kind of preserve that chain of what those Satoshis are, so that there's no debate and so that it can be followed. I could have one Satoshi which represents title to a house or a vehicle, or yeah, something like that. Some physical object, and I can create a script that essentially embeds a hash of a message which contains, among other things, what that Satoshi represents, and then also constrains any spending transactions such that whenever that Satoshi is spent, it must be spent subject to certain rules, including, for example, that the chain of representation cannot change, meaning that the same Satoshi, if you spend it by, for example, giving it to somebody else, signing over title, the single Satoshi needs to be included in the output, and it needs to represent the same object. There's also ways of constraining, for example, the minting and destroying of tokens and such, that make it so that an issuer of, for example, if I'm a bank, I could issue a $10 note, and then I could eventually someone could bring it back to me and could then redeem it, and I would give them the $10 that was represented by the Satoshi. So I think that's a brilliant design, just my personal opinion. But I'd like to see it compete with everything else, and I'd like to see what people want to build, because if somebody thinks that they can do something better or differently, then by all means.
Good answer. Thanks, Everett.
Yeah, on that note, I will say that I think we're going to be entering the year of interesting scripts, and we're going to see some very interesting token use. I hate the word token, because the rest of the cryptocurrency space, which isn't Bitcoin, as you all know, is married to like a token is a share. Whereas it can be, as you all know, it can be so much more. And a token is just a simple use case of script language to create a token. It can be so much more, as you all know. So, yeah, it can be really so much more, and the script language can be used like so much widely, so much wider, and a lot more complex. The complexity scripts, I think Craig said the other day, can have something like 64,000 different operations, which is ridiculously high. So I'm looking forward to see scripts which even use 1,000 operations. I don't see why you would need 1,000 operations yet, but actually I can kind of see. I mean, like you can like write complete programs like using 1,000 operations. Thinking like games and things which operate on script. And remember, not everything has to be on chain. You can have a lot of things off chain, but you use the blockchain to like validate things and to help pass money around, which is major key uses of it. Questions? Let's go back to questions. Any more questions, everyone? We've been going for almost an hour. On the topic of law and the courts, anything? Well, yeah, there you go. As Alex says, having signatures are more than 1,000 ops. So yeah, if you can do up to 64,000, you're going to be making a lot of use cases of it. I did a small video the other day trying to explain like transaction graphs, whatever it's been talking about as far as along those lines. if you start to grok what the capabilities of Bitcoin are like along those lines, then you don't necessarily have to be a developer to design business ideas. You can just, find a developer, and we have a fair amount of developers, and, try and partner up with them and say, hey, I've got an amazing business idea. This is what I need and such. It takes teams to build something like amazing. We're going to say something, Everett?
Well, I was just, I guess I'll bring this up now also. This idea that you talked about defining sort of business rules and such almost independently of code, or just very, very concisely in code. I've also been working on another thing called Bridgeport, and it's essentially the idea that state machines can be built on the blockchain. Bitcoin transactions can be fed into a kind of a conversion function and converted into, for example, MongoDB transactions in a database. What that would allow is somebody to build business, to define their business rules, like for their business, in an extremely concise way, and then anybody could interact with that state machine on the chain, because transactions are always going to be in the same order, and same state transition logic, same transactions fed in through the same order. You're going to arrive at a deterministic state, and you can use Bitcoin transactions to then model any finite state machine. With script, you can even add constraints on the spending transaction that it must have a certain sequence. The inputs must be having a certain sequence number, or the lock time could be within a certain range. So insofar as you want to, exceeding this cap of, I don't actually know that there's a limit on the number of operations in a script, but going above like 64,000 operations certainly is very possible. You could say, okay, well, the sequence number in the third input must be some number that modulo 3 equals 0 or something. And that way, if somebody has this really strange preference that or maybe it's even more than that, but you can start to say, okay, well, you can start to ascribe like sequence numbers at different modulos of an original, different meanings. So like mod 3 equals 0 could be one thing, and then whatever else, and create different cases there, and then say, okay, well, certain keys can only sign validly if you're going to spend this output that with certain one. That's another thing entirely, but with reference to the conciseness of business rules and such. If they are defined in terms of a finite state machine that models all of the data relevant to that business and the constraints under which that data can change, it makes it much easier to create kind of Bitcoin-powered backends for businesses that, including, for example, such things as a library that use Bitcoin transactions to deterministically kind of update their data sets and define the rules by which those data sets can be updated. Then the state transition logic could be either public, or it could be just left. It could be private or semi-private, where you share it with your clients and they know how to interact with you. Things can be encrypted, but all of that stuff is possible. And I just really think that most people haven't come to fully grasp the potential of script. So throwing these ideas out there, hopefully we'll get people to start building some cool things.
Just to add to that, the other week, there was a week or two ago, Citigroup, most of you probably read it, Citigroup sent out £600 million to its lenders or such, which whoever did it wasn't supposed to send out that much money. What Everett said, describing, would completely solve problems like that.
Because it would be defined in the rules of the state machine itself, that whatever transaction that would cause that to happen would be invalid, right? Because it would be predefined. And then the other thing is, if you don't want to have like set in stone state transition logic. You can actually write in your state transition logic that a certain transaction could mutate the state transition logic of a state machine. And I don't know how much of this people follow, but the other thing, yeah, if they would have just used Bitcoin, they could have probably gone and said, okay, well, this wasn't supposed to happen, so let's get a court order and create a correction entry in the ledger that would stop the or that would kind of undo the effect of the transaction which sent out the money that they weren't supposed to send out either way.
To be fair, they tried to get a court order, and it would have worked in a traditional system, but the court actually said no, because you actually owed them the money. They did owe the lenders the money, but they were supposed to slowly pay them back. And like they were supposed to slowly pay. They owed a total of 600 odd million, but they're meant to slowly pay back over a certain amount of times. And like with the state logic, as you're describing, the users could have been limited to only sending out like 10 million or whatever at a time,
of course, yes,
they were supposed to. Whereas current traditional systems, you know, yeah, they just fat-fingered 600 million for some reason.
Yeah. Pay less interest that way, I guess. I wasn't familiar with the specifics of that case, but yeah. Maybe they won't be paying as much interest now or something.
Yeah, silly buggers. There they are. Right. Questions. There's a question here for you. Everett, are you working on these things alone, or do you have a partner?
Oh, I just sit here and write code all day unless I'm on these calls. Don't really do very much else. So I suppose I'm doing this mostly on my own. It's the first Metanet meeting I've been to, and just started to network out to this space and see about finding people who may be interested in helping me with this stuff. But no, for now it's been really slow because I've been doing everything on my own for about a year. I have many other things I haven't referred to because they're not ready to be talked about yet, but I've just been writing code and doing stuff, and if someone wants to help, then send me a DM or something, and I'll maybe get you on board.
There you go, everyone, and that's for listeners as well in the Slack who's going to be listening to this afterwards as well. So I'm going to point out, you get the Pareto distribution in coding as well. Every so often you get a mad coder who basically does everything. and people will be like, don't you sleep? And it's, yeah, so good to have you on board.
Yeah, I shout out to, I guess, Steve Shatters is definitely one of those people in my view, at least from what I've seen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to get him into another meeting again one day, but busy people these days. Right, questions. We've gone over 1 hour. I'm going to see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, or any topics to bring up. Otherwise, I shall be bringing this soon to a close. Everyone, no? I'm going to touch quickly on last point then, that someone was bringing up the other day about doing drug deals and then pulling back the money and basically trying to cheat and shaft on drug dealers. This was a chat which has gone on a few times in the Slack. First of all, that would be a really bad idea because if you're dealing with people who deal with large amounts of money and also with crime, they are more likely to not resort to law to get what they will see as karma back on you. So don't do that. And also you would have to like go to court and prove that that person stole the money from you, which would bring you under investigation and everything. And seeing as you probably did buy the drugs or whatever it is you brought illegally, they would then say like, well, okay, you're under arrest as well, and the money is completely forfeited. So it's generally not a good idea. The other thing on this topic is that small amounts really don't matter. Police and people along those lines, they're not going to care about 10, 20, or maybe even up to £50 baggies, really, because when you're using something like Paymail, or there can be other systems similar to Paymail, where it's just basically where you're using a constantly changing address instead of like a constant address, which is like your drug address or something. and there's loads of people. I mean, we're talking like millions or billions of people using Bitcoin, and there's tons of transactions going on, new addresses getting generated all the time. Police and such aren't going to care about £10 movements. Okay, and was it someone brought this up to me the other day? But what if all the drugs are tracked like a Coke can? Because once Craig mentioned about if you threw your Coke can into the sea, people would be able to know, oh, it was him. But right, your £10 baggy drug dealer is not likely to mark his cannabis or whatever on the blockchain. If they do, he's a really stupid drug dealer, and I
No
suggest
little RFID chips inside of it.
Yeah, exactly. Microchips, that was my one. You know, this isn't an endorsement at all or anything about it. This is just explaining the simple reality that it's I'm gonna yeah it is Eric, on the small amounts. I'm not going to say the question, but I wouldn't, you know, the people, the thing is, in the crime world, often what happens in this day and age is that the smaller dealers and such get caught and go through the process and everything, and whereas the big dealers who move large amounts of money, they are separated from the what goes on at street level. They don't even touch the drugs, they just move large amounts of money. Now in a Bitcoin world, and I kind of shouldn't say this, but in a Bitcoin world, those people will be more noticed because they're moving large amounts of money and doing massive amounts of money laundering. That's where the money laundering level happens. And they're separated from the drugs, but they still receive all that money. Then they have to launder all that money and turn it into money which they can use. Those are going to become the more interesting thing for law enforcement and such to look at. So yeah, the people growing a plant at home or getting small amounts and things like that, but it's going to be more time and effort than it's worth trying to chase those people up than trying to get the big people. At the moment, it's more time and effort trying to get the big people, because even if you do, you can't normally do anything about it unless you've got proof and evidence. But if you and also they use lots of multiple bank accounts, which one of the things about tracing money against people moving large amounts is that it's really hard to keep going through numerous bank accounts and getting clearance to see the accounts. By the time you've got like to the third account, 2 or 3 months have passed, the third bank, and the money's bounced through like 30 different banks and 30 different countries and is completely somewhere else. But having a public blockchain makes it a lot easier. So if someone's trying to launder like 100,000 through housing and stuff, you can turn around and say, right, where did you get that money from? Things. So yeah, I mean, there's still going to be traceable and an evidence trail, but unless like when you pay for membership and do renewal at the Slack, I have a little tag on op return which basically states what it's for. So unless if your small dealer is doing things like that, oh, let me just add a little note what this is for, you know, you should be fine with all those little small amounts. But yeah, I can't quite see that happening, and they're pretty daft if they do. But yeah, crime and small crime, petty crime is always going to happen, but it's the big, massive crimes which you know, some of us are more interested in. Really.
I think that's also a Pareto distribution, I would suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we'll bring off the first people in the top of the distribution, and then the rest of them will follow, hopefully, but it'll take a while.
The interesting thing as well is, so it's theorized, is the ones at the top of that Pareto distribution that are involved with, you know, the large amounts of sales are also involved in many different types of crimes. The types of crimes which people, you know, find it completely abhorrent, like trafficking and abuse and all of that lot. So if you nail them on one thing, you can often like clean out a whole lot of horrible stuff. So yeah, it's in everyone's benefit that people like that are stopped. But I don't want to say too much on the thing. This is only going out to the Slack, but again, I do expect it might eventually reach public space. But yeah. Right. Any more questions? I'm going to call this meeting to a close soon then. Right, okay, in that case, thank you everyone. Thank you, Everett. Remember, everyone take a copy of what he linked above in the chat. If you joined late, it's at the top. I won't link it in the Slack, and anyone listening to this.
Yeah, just reach out to me if you want to talk about those sorts of things.
Yeah, reach out to Everett. He is, you are just TY Everett in the Slack as well, aren't you?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so just look at his username on his picture, you'll find him in the Slack. Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you Everett. I shall end the meeting for all.